Stand by the potted ferns. Say nothing. Be nothing. The words were not a suggestion. They were a sentence delivered by my stepmother with the placid smile she reserved for servants and me. Her voice, a confection of honey and steel, was the sound of my cage being locked. I adjusted the sleeve of my gown, a drab dove-gray silk that had been deemed suitably unobtrusive. It was the color of invisibility, the shade of a forgotten corner. Beside me, my stepsister Livia was a supernova in sapphire and diamonds, every thread a testament to our family's aspirations, every jewel a glittering plea for social ascension. Lady Anya, my stepmother, fussed over a stray lock of Livia's golden hair, her touch adoring, proprietary. I was merely part of the scenery, a drab backdrop intended to make Livia's brilliance all the more dazzling. My father had already drifted away, a ghost in his own home, his spine having dissolved years ago in the acid of his second wife's ambition. He loved me, I supposed, in the way one loves a piece of furniture that has always been there. A familiar shape in the periphery, but not something one ever truly looks at. After my mother died, he had sought not a partner, but a manager for his life, and Lady Anya had filled the role with terrifying efficiency. She managed his estate, his social calendar, and his firstborn daughter, whom she had swiftly identified as a useless asset. Livia, her own daughter, was the prize pony. I was the stable mouse. So I did as I was told. I found the designated alcove at the Grand Atherton Ball, a pocket of shadow between two towering funereal ferns whose fronds tickled my shoulders like skeletal fingers. From here, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the ballroom's magnificent vaulted ceiling. My secret solace. While others saw a sea of faces, of shimmering gowns and calculating eyes, I saw the intricate dance of hammer-beam trusses, the subtle genius of the fan vaulting that spread across the ceiling like petrified lace. I lost myself in the geometry, in the silent, soaring story told by stone and plaster. It was a language I understood, a beauty that asked for nothing in return. My passion was architecture, not the decorating of rooms, which Lady Anya considered a suitable, if minor, feminine accomplishment, but the bones of buildings, their history, their structure, their soul. My small collection of books on the subject, inherited from a grand uncle, was my only true possession, kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my room like forbidden love letters. To my stepmother, this interest was another mark of my strangeness, my willful refusal to be marketable. No man, she had once sighed with theatrical pity, wants a wife who can calculate the load-bearing capacity of a balustrade. I was tracing the curve of an arch with my eyes, mentally sketching its lines, when I heard her voice nearby, dripping with false bonhomie. Lady Anya was speaking to Lord Pemberton, a portly man whose estate bordered ours and whose son was considered a prime match for Livia. "Oh, Livia is a treasure," she purred. "All light and laughter. It is a mother's duty to cultivate such radiance." Lord Pemberton grunted his agreement, his eyes fixed on Livia as she waltzed by, a vision of youthful perfection. Then his gaze snagged on my shadowed corner. "And your other daughter?" he inquired, his tone holding the mild curiosity one might afford a piece of unfamiliar taxidermy. Lady Anya's laugh was a tinkling shard of ice. "Ah, Ilara," she said, and I felt the name in the air like a small, dull thud. She made a dismissive gesture, a flick of her wrist that erased me from existence. "That is our quiet little mouse. We keep her for decoration. She is exceptionally good at holding up walls." The men with them chuckled politely. The sound was a physical blow. Hot shame, sharp and acidic, flooded my throat. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, wishing the wall would absorb me, that I could become the stone and mortar I so admired, unfeeling, impervious, and eternal. I squeezed my eyes shut, the glorious ceiling dissolving behind my eyelids into a blur of pain. Be nothing. She had her wish. I was nothing, a decorative mouse, a structural support, less than human. A sudden shift in the room's atmosphere pricked at my skin. The hum of conversation faltered, the orchestra's melody seeming to thin. I opened my eyes. A path had cleared through the center of the ballroom, as if the sea of shimmering silks and black tailcoats had parted for a king. He had arrived. The Duke of Blackwood. Alistair. His name was a legend whispered in drawing rooms across the country. Immensely wealthy, impossibly powerful, and fiercely reclusive. He was a creature of myth, said to be as cold and unyielding as the granite of his northern estate. He never attended such frivolous events, yet here he was, standing at the threshold of the ballroom, a severe, arresting figure in immaculate black. He was not handsome in the conventional, charming way of the other young lords. His features were too sharp, his expression too remote. A scar, a thin silver line, cut through one dark eyebrow, giving him a permanent look of stern inquiry. His stillness was what was most unnerving. He absorbed the light and attention of the entire room and reflected none of it back. He exchanged a clipped formal greeting with our host, Lord Atherton, his voice too low to carry. His gaze, a startlingly pale gray, swept the room once. It was a dismissive, almost contemptuous assessment. It slid over the hopeful debutantes, the posturing young men, the preening matriarchs. It slid over Livia's radiant beauty without a flicker of interest. His eyes moved past the glittering chandeliers and the groaning banquet tables. And then they stopped. They found my alcove. They found me. My heart ceased its frantic rhythm and simply stopped dead. For a paralyzing second, I was certain he was looking at the ferns, or perhaps a flaw in the wall behind me. But his focus was unwavering. It was direct. He was looking at me. I could feel the weight of his stare across the expanse of polished floor, a tangible pressure. He saw me. He saw the girl in the gray dress hiding in the shadows. He saw the decorative mouse. I saw him register my presence, and then his gaze lifted slightly, following the line of my own. He looked up at the vaulted ceiling. A long, silent moment passed. His head tilted, a minute adjustment. He was not looking at the people, he was looking at the building, just as I had been. And then the unthinkable happened. He began to move. He was not drawn into the crowd. He did not seek out a dance partner. He simply started walking. A straight, deliberate line from the ballroom entrance directly toward my corner. The whispers died. The music faltered again. Every head in the room turned to follow his inexorable progress. He ignored my stunned father. He walked past Lady Anya, whose placid smile had frozen into a mask of disbelief. He bypassed Livia, leaving her standing mid-laugh, her sapphire gown suddenly looking garish. He crossed the vast, empty space he had created around himself, and did not stop until he was standing before me, his shadow falling over me like a shield. The scent of winter air and old books clung to him. Up close, the severity of his face was even more pronounced, a study in sharp angles and uncompromising lines. The entire world had shrunk to the space between two potted ferns. The silence was absolute, a ringing vacuum. He looked down at me, his pale eyes holding an unnerving intelligence. I felt pinned by his gaze, unable to breathe, unable to think. I waited for the dismissal, the cruel joke, the punchline to a prank I did not understand. Instead, his voice, when it came, was a low, resonant baritone, utterly devoid of artifice. "You seem to be the only person here looking at the building, instead of the people in it," he said, the statement quiet, but carrying in the profound hush. "Tell me what you see." The question hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the abyss of my humiliation. It was not a pleasantry, it was a genuine inquiry. My throat was a knot of panic and disbelief. Words, my constant companions in the solitude of my room, deserted me. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on my back, could feel my stepmother's fury burning a hole through the ferns. Say nothing, be nothing. Her command echoed in my head. But his eyes held mine, patient, waiting. He had not asked my name. He had not commented on my appearance. He had asked for my thoughts. It was an offering so unexpected, so radical, that it short-circuited years of conditioning. I took a breath that felt like my first. "The fan vaulting," I whispered, my voice rusty from disuse. "It is a late example of the perpendicular Gothic style. It is purely decorative. The structural work is done by the transverse ribs, but the conoidal fans, they are there to draw the eye upward, to evoke a sense of the sublime. He did not smile, but the intensity in his gaze deepened. Sublime, he repeated, tasting the word. An interesting choice. Most would say pretty. It is not pretty, I found myself saying, a little stronger now. It is a mathematical marvel disguised as art. It is an argument for order in a chaotic world. It is honest. His expression remained unreadable, but the corner of his mouth tightened, a fractional shift that might have been the ghost of a smile. Honest, he said again, his voice even lower. I find myself in agreement. And then, as abruptly as he had arrived, he gave a short, formal nod. Thank you for your assessment, Miss Ilara, I managed to say. Ilara Vance. Miss Vance, he acknowledged. He turned without another word and walked away, his departure as decisive as his arrival. The ballroom erupted into a frantic buzz of speculation behind him, the spell broken. He had spoken to no one else. I stood, trembling in my alcove, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He had seen me. He had spoken to me. He had listened. For one bizarre, incandescent moment, I had not been invisible. The feeling was so foreign, so overwhelming, it was almost painful. It felt like hope, and hope was a danger I had long ago taught myself to avoid. It was a whim, I told myself sternly, a duke's eccentric fancy. It meant nothing. It was a fleeting anomaly, a crack in the smooth, cold surface of my life. But as I watched his retreating back, I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that nothing would ever be the same. The wall I was meant to be holding up had developed a fissure, and through it, a sliver of impossible light was pouring in. The next morning, the house was a storm of my stepmother's fury. My brief, bizarre conversation with the Duke of Blackwood had eclipsed even Livia's success. It was an intolerable disruption of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. "What did you say to him?" she demanded, cornering me in the hallway. Her face, stripped of its public sweetness, was pinched and cold. "What game are you playing, Ilara? Do you think to make a fool of this family with your strange little affectations?" I answered his question, I said, my voice small. He asked about the ceiling. "The ceiling," she hissed, her disbelief curdling into contempt. "Do not be a simpleton. A man like that does not cross a ballroom to discuss plasterwork. He was mocking you, and you, like a fool, fell for it. You have made us a laughingstock." I had no defense, because a part of me believed she was right. It had to be a joke, a moment of aristocratic boredom. The memory of his intense, serious gaze was the only thing that argued otherwise, a small, warm ember in the cold dread of the morning. I retreated to my room, to the familiar comfort of my books, telling myself to forget him, to forget the feeling of being seen. The summons arrived just before noon. A footman, liveried in the severe dark gray and silver of the Blackwood Duchy, delivered it on a silver tray. It was not an invitation. It was a command, written on thick, creamy parchment in a stark, decisive hand. The Duke of Blackwood requested my presence at his city residence at 2 o'clock to offer my opinion on a matter of architectural history. Lady Anya read the note, her face a thunderous mask of confusion and rage. A duke did not summon a forgotten stepdaughter to consult on history. It was nonsensical. It was improper. But it was also a ducal command. To refuse was unthinkable. "What is the meaning of this?" she spat, waving the parchment as if it were infested. "What have you done?" "Nothing," I whispered, my own heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat of terror and something else, something I refused to name. She was forced to agree. I was sent upstairs to change, with the grudging admonition to, at least try not to look like a charity case. I put on my best day dress, a simple navy blue wool, my hands shaking as I fastened the buttons. I was being sent into the lion's den, and I did not understand why. Was this the punchline? A private humiliation to follow the public one. Blackwood House was a monolith of pale stone on a grand, quiet square. Its facade as severe and unadorned as its master. It did not invite, it intimidated. I was shown into a library that stole my breath away. It was not a room, it was a cathedral of books. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, connected by a delicate cast-iron spiral staircase. The air smelled of leather, paper, and beeswax. Light from a massive arched window illuminated a universe of dust motes dancing in the silence. He was standing by the fireplace, not looking at me as I was announced. He was studying a large blueprint unfurled on a lectern. "Miss Vance," he said, without turning, "thank you for coming." I murmured something incoherent, overwhelmed by the scale of the room and the man. Finally, he turned to face me. In the clear light of day, the scar above his eye was more prominent, a flaw in a perfect cold sculpture. "Tea?" he asked. It was not a question so much as a statement of fact. A moment later, a formidable-looking woman in a black dress, his housekeeper, entered with a tray. She set it down on a low table between 2 surprisingly comfortable-looking armchairs. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and her expression was as unreadable as the Duke's, but her movements were gentle as she poured the tea. He gestured for me to sit. I did, perching on the edge of the cushion like a nervous sparrow. He took the opposite chair. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I steeled myself for the inevitable dismissal. "7 years ago," he began, his voice calm and measured. "A tutor at the Allerton Academy for Young Ladies submitted an essay from one of his pupils to the Royal Society of Architects for consideration for their Youth Prize. The essay was a study of the structural and social implications of post-war civic architecture in the northern counties. It was praised for its unusual insight and clarity of thought. The pupil was a 14-year-old girl. The essay did not win, but one of the judges, a friend of my father's, kept a copy. He passed it to me last year, knowing my interest in the subject. My blood ran cold. I remembered that essay. I had poured my heart into it, my secret world of lines and stresses, and the stories buildings told. My tutor, a kind, elderly man, had been so proud. Lady Anya had discovered his submission and had been livid, forbidding me from ever writing such unladylike nonsense again. The tutor was dismissed shortly after. The Duke reached into a drawer in the table beside him and produced a slim-bound folio. He slid it across the table toward me. My name was written on the cover in my own adolescent script. Alara Vance. "I found the analysis of the Bradford Guildhall particularly perceptive," he continued, his pale eyes watching my reaction. "Your theory on how the widened staircases were not a feature of grandeur, but a deliberate response to the public assembly anxieties of the time was compelling." I stared at the folio, then at him. My carefully constructed defenses, my conviction that this was all a cruel game, crumbled into dust. He had not been mocking me. His interest was not a whim. He had sought me out not because of who I appeared to be at the ball, but because of who I had been in the privacy of my own mind 7 years ago. He had seen the person I kept hidden from the world. You read it?" I stammered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Several times," he confirmed, with no change in expression. "Which is why I have asked you here. I am planning a restoration of the west wing of Blackwood Castle. The original structure dates from the 15th century, but it was heavily modified in the 18th. The plans my architects have submitted are safe, predictable. They lack historical integrity. They lack honesty." He gestured to the blueprint on the lectern. "I would be grateful for your opinion." It was the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever said to me. He was not offering charity. He was not making a romantic gesture. He was offering me a seat at the table, a problem to solve. He was offering me respect. As I drank my tea, a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the hot liquid. It was the slow, terrifying dawn of hope. He offered me a small plate of biscuits. He noticed the chill in the room and had Mrs. Gable add another log to the fire. Small practical kindnesses that felt more profound than any flowery compliment. For the first time in a decade, I felt something other than invisible. I felt solid. I felt real. And as I rose and walked toward the blueprint, I felt the first stirrings of a person I had long since buried, myself. That first meeting in his library set the rhythm for the weeks that followed. Twice a week, a carriage bearing the Blackwood crest would arrive at our door to convey me to the grand, quiet house. Lady Anya could do nothing but watch, her face a mask of simmering resentment, as I was whisked away to consult with the most powerful and enigmatic peer in the realm. She tried to pry details from me, but I had none to give that she would understand. We discussed the merits of lime mortar versus modern cement in the repointing of medieval stonework, I would tell her honestly. She would stare at me, her eyes narrowing. That is all? Mortar? And the feasibility of restoring a collapsed oriel window based on a single sketch from 1782, I would add. She could not comprehend it. In her world, interactions between men and women were a dance of flirtation, ambition, and transaction. The idea of a shared intellectual pursuit was as foreign as a language from a forgotten land. Her inability to understand was a small protective shield for me. My time with the Duke existed in a separate reality, one she could not infiltrate or corrupt. Our meetings took on a comfortable, studious ritual. We would sit at the large oak table in the center of the library, surrounded by rolled blueprints, dusty historical folios, and sketches I had made. Mrs. Gable would serve tea, her stern face occasionally softening as she watched us, a silent, formidable chaperone whose presence was more reassuring than restrictive. She saw, I think, the truth of our association. She would ensure the fire was lit before I arrived, or that a shawl was draped over my chair if the afternoon grew cool. Her quiet care was a balm. Alistair, he had insisted I call him Alistair when we were alone, the name feeling heavy and strange on my tongue, was a demanding intellectual partner. He would challenge my assumptions, push me to defend my theories, and listen with an unnerving stillness that forced me to be precise and clear. In his presence, the hesitant, whispering girl I was at home vanished. A different Alara emerged, one who could argue passionately for the preservation of a Tudor archway or trace the evolution of a flying buttress with confident fingers on a faded drawing. "You see buildings as living things," he remarked one afternoon, looking up from a detailed cross-section I had drawn of a chapel on his estate. "They are," I replied, without hesitation. "They carry the memories of everyone who has ever lived in them. They settle, they age, they scar, they have souls of a kind." His gaze on me was intense. "And what is the soul of Blackwood Castle?" I considered it. "It is lonely," I said softly. "It is proud and strong, but it was built for a large, thriving family. Now it is too quiet. The halls echo." I froze, realizing I had overstepped, that I had commented not on the stone, but on the man. But he did not take offense. He simply looked away, toward the rain-streaked window, and a shadow passed over his features, deep and profound. It was during a discussion about a small, ancient stone bridge on the far edge of his northern lands that he finally showed me the source of that shadow. The plans called for it to be demolished and replaced with a modern iron structure. I had argued against it, citing its rustic charm and historical significance. "It is structurally unsound," he stated, his voice flat. "It is a risk." "It could be reinforced," I countered. "We could brace the arches from beneath, replace the eroded keystones. To tear it down would be to erase a piece of history." "History is not worth a life," he snapped, his voice suddenly raw, stripped of its usual control. The outburst was so uncharacteristic, it shocked me into silence. He stood and walked to the fireplace, turning his back to me. The tension in his shoulders was a tangible thing. "When I was 19, he said, his voice low and strained, "my younger brother Thomas was 17. He loved the theater. He was bright and loud and full of a life that I envied." He paused, and I could hear the effort in his breathing. There was a new opera house, a marvel of modern design, all gilt and grandeur. We were there for the opening night. In the middle of the second act, there was a sound, a groan of wood and plaster. The balcony collapsed. Thomas was sitting beneath it. The silence that followed was vast and terrible, filled with the ghost of a 17-year-old boy's laughter. I did not move. I did not breathe. I was a witness to a grief so profound it had reshaped the world of the man before me. "The investigation found the architect had cut corners," Alistair continued, his voice hollow. "Used cheaper timber for the support beams. sacrificed integrity for aesthetics, for profit. I inherited the title a year later when my father's heart gave out. I retreated to Blackwood and made a vow. Nothing under my name, nothing on my land, would ever again be built on a foundation of lies. He turned back to face me, and his eyes were not the cold gray of a remote duke, but the shattered gray of a man haunted by loss. The severe mask was gone, and in its place was a vulnerability so stark it made my own heart ache in sympathy. He was not cold, he was wounded. His solitude was not arrogance. It was a fortress built to keep the chaos of a faithless world at bay. In that moment, the last of my fear of him dissolved, replaced by a deep, resonant wave of understanding. I saw the lonely boy behind the powerful man, and my soul recognized his. A few days later, he gave me a tour of a disused wing of Blackwood House. It was dusty and draped in white cloths, a sleeping giant. "My mother's apartments," he said quietly. "They have not been touched since she passed." He led me to a small, circular room at the top of a turret, its walls lined with shelves holding not books, but celestial maps. He pointed to a complex astrolabe on a stand. She loved astronomy. She said it was like architecture, but for the heavens. As he explained the workings of the intricate brass device, his hand brushed against mine. It was an accident, a fleeting contact. But then, his fingers curled slightly, a brief, questioning pressure against my own. My breath hitched. It was not a grand gesture, not a passionate embrace, but it was more intimate than anything I had ever known. The touch lingered for a heartbeat too long, a silent acknowledgement that the space between us was no longer merely intellectual. He looked at me, and his face, usually so composed, was transformed by an expression of profound, aching loneliness that I knew was a mirror of my own. He did not smile, not quite, but the severity in his eyes softened into something else, something warm and uncertain and deeply human. The boundary had been crossed. We were no longer just a duke and his consultant. We were Alistair and Alara. And in the dusty, silent turret room, surrounded by the ghosts of his mother's stars, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating pull of falling. The change in me, however subtle, did not go unnoticed. I began to hold my head a little higher. The hesitant tremor in my voice when I spoke at the dinner table sometimes vanished entirely. I had a place to go where my thoughts were valued, a person who saw me as I was. This nascent confidence was, to my stepmother, a declaration of war. She saw the Blackwood carriage arrive twice a week. She saw the new light in my eyes, and she saw it as a direct threat to her meticulously laid plans. Livia was meant to be the star, the one to make a brilliant match. My unexpected connection to the Duke was an intolerable anomaly that skewed the narrative. And Alara, who was sought after, who was respected by a man of Alistair's stature, was no longer a useful, drab backdrop. I was a competitor. "You are getting foolish ideas, Alara," she said to me one evening, her voice deceptively calm as she adjusted a flower arrangement. "Do not mistake a powerful man's momentary amusement for anything more. He is toying with you. When he is done, he will discard you, and you will have made this family look ridiculous." "He is not toying with me," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We discuss architecture." Her laugh was a brittle thing. "Oh, my dear naive child, you cannot possibly believe that. He is a duke, you are you. He is using you for some purpose you cannot fathom. A diversion, perhaps, or something crueler." When her warnings failed to extinguish the small flame of self-worth he had kindled in me, she decided to take more decisive action. If she could not intimidate me into submission, she would destroy the connection at its source. She would poison the well. Unbeknownst to me, she spent an entire afternoon composing a letter. It was, I would later learn, a masterpiece of manipulative prose. It was written on her finest stationery, her elegant script flowing across the page in what appeared to be a torrent of maternal concern. She wrote to Alistair not as an accuser, but as a heartbroken mother, forced to reveal a painful family secret for my own protection. She painted a picture of me as a fragile, fanciful creature, prone to delusions. She wrote of my unhealthy obsessions with my books, my difficult nature, my tendency to live in a world of my own making. With devastating skill, she twisted my quietness into sullen withdrawal, my shyness into a symptom of mental instability. She claimed I had a history of developing intense, imaginary attachments to men of status, and that the family had spent years gently trying to manage these episodes. She wrote of my feverish excitement about my visits to him, framing my intellectual awakening as a dangerous fantasy she feared would lead to a complete breakdown. The letter culminated in a desperate, tear-stained plea. "For Alara's own sake," she wrote, her words dripping with false sorrow, "I must beg you to cease this association. Your kindness, which I know is meant well, is feeding her delusions. To continue to see her would be a cruelty. Please, Your Grace, for the sake of a troubled girl's sanity, let her go." She sent the letter by private messenger, confident that it would be the final, fatal blow. She believed that no man, especially not a reclusive and guarded duke, would wish to be entangled with a hysterical, unstable woman. She had crafted a cage of lies and expected him to lock the door and throw away the key, leaving me trapped inside forever. She had fatally underestimated her opponent. Alistair received the letter in his library. He read it once, his face impassive. He then read it a second time, his pale eyes missing nothing. Not the carefully chosen words, not the feigned distress, not the faint scent of cloying perfume clinging to the paper. He placed it down on his desk. He did not for 1 second believe it. His quiet, observant nature, the very trait that had allowed him to see me in a crowded ballroom, had also given him an almost infallible sense of character. He had spent weeks in conversation with me. He had listened to my thoughts, tested my intellect, and seen the deep, steady integrity that ran through me like a vein of steel. He had witnessed my honesty. The woman described in the letter, a flighty, delusional creature, bore no resemblance to the Alara he knew. The letter was not a warning, it was an attack, and he recognized the poison of a tyrant. He did not write back. He did not confront Lady Anya. He acted. With the quiet, swift efficiency that defined him, he set his considerable resources in motion. He did not investigate me. He trusted his own judgment on that score. He launched a discreet but thorough investigation into the author of the letter, my stepmother. He tasked his men of law with examining my family's finances, specifically the disposition of the assets left to me by my late mother. It did not take them long. The truth, as is often the case with such sordid matters, was buried in plain sight in ledgers and bank records. Lady Anya, the masterful manager of my father's estate, had been systematically misappropriating the funds from my mother's dowry. It was a substantial sum, meant to be held in trust for me until my marriage or my 25th birthday. For years, she had been siphoning it off, using it to fund Livia's extravagant wardrobe, to host lavish parties, to fuel her relentless climb up the social ladder. My drab gray dresses and my status as a poor relation were not a matter of circumstance. They were a matter of deliberate, calculated theft. Armed with this irrefutable proof, Alistair made his move. He did not choose a public forum. He chose his own ground, his library. The very room where I had first found my voice. A summons was sent, requesting the presence of my father, Lady Anya, and me at Blackwood House the following afternoon. Another, separate summons went to Livia. My stepmother was triumphant. She was certain the Duke had capitulated, that he was calling this meeting to formally and gently sever ties, just as she had requested. "Now, Alara," she said, her tone oozing with patronizing sympathy, "you must be brave. The Duke is a good man, and he is doing what is best for you. There are to be no tears, no scenes, just a quiet, dignified acceptance." I walked into the lion's den for the second time, but now I was not alone. I did not know what was about to happen, but as I saw Alistair standing by the fireplace, his expression as unyielding as granite, I felt a strange sense of calm. He met my eyes for a brief moment, and in that glance I saw an unspoken promise of protection. My father looked nervous, my stepmother confident. Livia, who had arrived separately, looked merely confused. Alistair waited until we were all assembled. Mrs. Gable stood like a sentinel by the door. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice calm and dangerously quiet. He looked directly at Lady Anya. "I received your letter." A smug, sad smile touched her lips. "Your Grace, it pained me to write it, but I felt I had no choice." "It was," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her performance like a blade through silk, "a work of fiction. And not a very good one." Lady Anya's smile froze. I do not understand." "You describe Miss Vance as a creature of fantasy and delusion," he said, picking up the letter from his desk. "My experience has been quite the opposite. I have found her to be one of the most rigorously honest and lucid minds I have ever had the pleasure of encountering." He let the letter drop back onto the desk. "You, on the other hand, Lady Anya, seem to have a remarkable talent for fabrication." He then produced another set of papers, legal documents, ledgers. "These, however, tell a story that is all too real." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. In a calm, systematic, and utterly devastating monologue, he laid her bare. He detailed the trust established by my mother's will. He cited dates and figures, tracing the flow of money from my inheritance into her accounts. He presented the evidence of her fraud, her theft, her decade-long campaign of greed, all without a flicker of emotion. My father stared, his face ashen, as the truth of his wife's treachery was revealed. Livia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized the sapphire gown she wore had been bought with my money. Lady Anya's face went from indignant confusion to chalky white terror. "These are lies," she hissed, her voice losing its honeyed tone and becoming shrill. "Slander! How dare you?" "The records are quite clear," Alistair stated, his voice dropping even lower. "You have stolen from your stepdaughter. You have kept her in a state of poverty and dependence while using her own money to fund your social ambitions. You have done this under the roof of a man who trusted you." He glanced at my father, a look of cold pity in his eyes. "And when you perceived that Miss Vance might, through her own merit, escape the cage you built for her, you attempted to destroy her reputation with a web of malicious lies." All eyes were on my stepmother, who stood cornered, sputtering, her mask of gentility shattered, revealing the ugly, grasping thing beneath. And in that moment, seeing her stripped of her power, seeing the truth illuminated by the cold, clear light of Alistair's defense, something within me broke free. The fear was gone. The years of practiced silence, of making myself small, evaporated like mist. I took a step forward. "It was not just the money," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. I looked directly at the woman who had tried to erase me. "You did not just steal my inheritance, you tried to steal myself. For 10 years you have told me I was plain, that I was strange, that I was worthless. You told me my thoughts were unladylike nonsense, and my passions were foolish affectations. You told me to be quiet, to be invisible, to be nothing." I took another step. "I was not a person to you. I was a problem to be managed, a ghost in my own home. You told me the Duke was mocking me, that he was toying with me, because you cannot conceive of a world where a woman is valued for her mind. You cannot imagine a man seeing worth in a person you have deemed worthless." My voice grew stronger with every word, fueled by a decade of suppressed pain. "I am not a decorative mouse. I am not a charity case. I am not a creature of fantasy. I am the daughter of the woman whose memory you dishonored and whose fortune you stole. I am a person of thoughts and ideas and worth, and you will never, ever tell me to be nothing again."
The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Anya stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, utterly defeated. My father finally looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a wave of profound, gut-wrenching remorse wash over his face.
"Elara,"
he whispered, his voice cracking.
"I am so sorry. I did not see."
Livia, her face streaked with tears, rushed to my side.
She did not touch me, but stood near, a silent, trembling ally. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I was so blind." Alistair stepped forward, his presence final and absolute. "You will repay every penny, Lady Anya," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will sign a full confession of your actions. and you will remove yourself from this city. If you ever trouble Miss Vance or her family again, these documents will become a matter of public record and legal action. You are ruined. But whether you are ruined publicly or privately is, for now, your choice." Defeated, disgraced, and utterly broken, she had no choice but to agree. The tyrant had been deposed. The battle was over. And I was, for the first time in my life, free. My father, shamefaced and broken, escorted a weeping Livia and a silent, shattered Lady Anya from the room. The heavy library doors closed behind them, shutting out a decade of misery. I was left alone with Alistair in the quiet, book-lined room. I was trembling, drained by the confrontation, but standing taller than I ever had before. The air tasted clean, new. He did not move for a long moment, simply watching me, his pale eyes searching my face. I wrapped my arms around myself, a sudden chill sweeping through me in the aftermath of the storm. He crossed the room and stood before me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I expected him to say something about justice or victory. I expected him to take credit for my liberation. Instead, he reached out, not to touch me, but to gently take my hands and unclasp them from their protective clench. He held them loosely in his own. His hands were warm and strong. "I did not give you a voice, Alara," he said, his voice low and intensely earnest. "I only created a space where you felt safe enough to use the one you always had." I looked up at him, my eyes blurring with tears, not of pain, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. "You saw me," I whispered, "when no one else did, not even me." "I saw a woman tracing the lines of a ceiling in a room full of fools," he said, a faint, rare smile finally touching his lips. It transformed his severe face, chasing away the shadows. "I saw an honest eye in a world of artifice. I saw the author of an essay that understood the soul of buildings. I saw you." He lifted one of my hands and brushed his thumb over my knuckles. The simple gesture sent a jolt of warmth straight to my heart. I have lived my life surrounded by foundations of stone and iron, seeking honesty and structure because I had found so little of it in people. My world has been a fortress, Alara, quiet, orderly, and empty. You are the first person in a very long time who has made me want to open the gates. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was more terrifying, more exhilarating than confronting my stepmother. This was the precipice of a new and unknown world. "I do not wish to be your rescuer," he continued, his gaze holding mine with breathtaking sincerity. "I wish to be your partner. I value your mind, your integrity, your quiet strength. I value the way you see the world. I am asking if you would be willing to build a life with me, Alara Vance. One built on a foundation of honesty and respect. I am asking you to be my wife." The question hung in the sacred silence of the library, surrounded by the scent of old paper and the weight of a million stories. It was not a proposal born of duty or passion in the conventional sense. It was a meeting of souls, an offer of partnership, an invitation to be equals. He was not a prince saving a damsel. He was a man who had recognized the queen in the forgotten girl and was asking to stand beside her. Tears finally spilled over and traced paths down my cheeks. "Yes," I breathed, the word a release, a promise, a beginning. "Yes, Alistair." He lowered his head, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a spark of fire, but a deep, grounding warmth. It was not a conquest, but a homecoming. It tasted of relief, of safety, and of the profound, earth-shattering joy of being utterly and completely seen. It was the end of a very long, very cold winter. A year later, I stood on the balcony of the newly restored west wing of Blackwood Castle. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth from the fells. Below me, the gardens were a tapestry of gold and crimson. Beside me, Alistair rested his hands on the stone parapet, the same ancient stone I had once studied on a blueprint. I was now the Duchess of Blackwood. The title felt both impossibly grand and perfectly natural. My days were no longer filled with silence and shadows, but with purpose. I worked alongside Alistair, managing the vast estates, overseeing the restorations we had once planned together in his library. My architectural books were no longer hidden beneath a floorboard. They lined a place of honor on our shelves beside his own. We were funding the construction of a new public library in the nearby village, a building of honest stone and soaring light, and the blueprints, bearing both our marks, lay on the desk inside. My father, humbled and contrite, had begun the slow process of rebuilding a relationship with me. Livia, free from her mother's influence, had found a surprising strength and kindness, and her letters were a source of genuine comfort. Lady Anya was a ghost, a bad memory, gone from our lives forever. Alistair turned his head, his pale eyes soft in the afternoon light. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice the familiar, low rumble that was the constant, steady music of my life. I smiled, a real, unhesitating smile that reached my eyes. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. "I was thinking about a girl in a gray dress," I said softly, standing in a corner, by the ferns, trying her very best to be nothing. He wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. "I have never met that girl," he murmured, his lips brushing against my hair. "The only person I saw was a woman who knew the difference between what is pretty and what is true." I looked out at the rolling hills of my new home, at the endless sky above. The girl in the shadows was a part of my story, a foundation of quiet resilience upon which this new life was built. But she was not who I was anymore. I was Alara, Duchess of Blackwood. I was a partner, a builder, a wife. I was a woman standing in the light, beside the man who had not rescued me, but had simply seen me, and in doing so, had given me back to myself. I was home.